Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are joined by professional soprano and private music tutor Sofia Livertov to discuss the place of music in education. But join us as we explore life as a student in European conservatoires, the performer as teacher and the portfolio career, and the benefits of a universal music education.
Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/lsw/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Sunday Late Show. You join me tonight at the start of a half-term holiday that this time last week seemed like it might never come, as each early start of the past fortnight has gradually got darker and darker, while the moorland fog has begun to linger for longer and longer into the late morning. It's been a long 7 and a bit weeks, but this extended unbroken run has given us all a chance to make it through our Year 11 set texts at excellent pace. So my happy band have already completed half of Cambridge's IGCSE poetry anthology and have begun to get to grips with some of the more rarefied poetic diction that appears in the Poems of Love, Wisdom and Ageing collection composed before 1600. Most of them can now distinguish an I am from a trochee with a respectable level of accuracy. Some have discovered that their Christian names are actually dactyls, and one has even asked why we don't have more hexameter poems in the anthology. Last week gave my Year 11 students the opportunity to start their set novel, the Australian Gothic mystery boarding school thriller Picnic at Hanging Rock. We have just reached the part of the end of chapter 4 when our party of 19th century girls have returned to college from their Valentine's Day outing to Hanging Rock, but without 3 of their older schoolmates. So far, it seems that the weirdly supernatural rock, alive with an animal presence that constantly eludes the eye, has claimed them for itself. Inevitably, the last person to see them all together is Irma, a girl who is unable to conceive of the concept of a million without getting a headache, and who barely has the words to form a coherent witness statement for the patient members of the Victoria Constabulary. This will be the first time I have taught this text, although my colleagues did a fine job with it last year. It is fascinating to see how the boarding school students sitting in front of me respond as their 19th century counterparts moan about having to learn romantic poetry by heart, keep their gloves on throughout the coach ride to Hanging Rock, and be back for tea by late afternoon. They seem to have been surprised too by just how much responsibility the senior girls appear to shoulder for the success and the well-being of the younger girls in the novel, assuming a status that is typically held by recent graduates in today's British boarding schools. Of additional interest to me as I listen along to the Australian audiobook reader with my class is the way in which the staff are presented as complex, fallible, and human, with lives that unfold and develop in interesting ways even during term time. The late 19th century setting suggests that the novel's events take place within 20 years of the Education Act of 1872, which established a system of free, secular and compulsory education in Victoria, overseen by the newly formed Education Department and an Inspector General and Crown Minister to direct it. In such an educational environment, Appleyard College, as a private fee-paying school established by a single proprietor, represents a continuation of the English tradition of an accomplishment education for the daughters of the wealthy at a time when Victoria's private schools were not subject to inspection or regulation by any of the bodies created by the Education Act of 1872. Oversight of schools such as the college would not come until the Education Act of 1910, which brought the responsibility for maintaining standards in private schools into the remit of a new Council of Public Education. And what we see in Picnic at Hanging Rock is an account of a school trip gone wrong, supervised by staff with limited training, dubious academic credentials, and incomplete knowledge of the region into which they have been transplanted. A contemporary Ofsted report into events at Appleyard College, as presented in the text, would surely read like a dummy's guide on how not to run a boarding school, with an added twist of the supernatural macabre, which is ideal for reading at Halloween. The penultimate week of October saw the students and staff of the boarding house in which I am a tutor take a journey out of the countryside and into York for an afternoon to celebrate the life and works of St. Margaret Clitheroe, a Roman Catholic martyr of the Elizabethan period who was pressed to death under a door for the then treasonous act of harbouring Roman Catholic priests. We learnt how the comparative ordinariness of her life stood as an example of the nature of the moral courage that we might be called upon to demonstrate in different ways in our own lives, and as a reminder that the saints were all men and women of flesh and blood before their canonization. Our walking tour of York took in the shrine to St. Margaret Clitheroe, which is hidden away on the shambles behind a plain brick facade, the Bar Convent, which houses a secret Baroque-styled chapel and an excellent museum on the history of Catholic worship and educational provision in the north of England. And it concluded with some prayer and reflection in the Grade 2 listed York Oratory, surely one of the finest examples of a Gothic revival church anywhere in Europe. Then it was back to college for some food and some social time with the whole party intact, I'm pleased to say, before finishing the evening with a candlelit service of sung night prayer. The day was a welcome pause from the assessment marking and grade report writing that can otherwise define the slog towards the half-term holiday. Now that the clocks have turned back, of course, the attention of those in many choral boarding schools naturally turns towards Advent and Christmas, and the rehearsal of carols and the vast annual set piece that is Handel's Messiah, while keeping track of the liturgical changes that come with the start of the Advent season. The closing date for BBC Radio 3's annual Christmas carol writing competition also falls on Tuesday, so any student musicians aged 11 and over who are thinking of coming up with a melody to accompany Simon Armitage's Polaris poem had better get cracking. Inspired by Armitage's recent Arctic writing residency and by preparations for this year's G7 climate summit, the poem, in subdued fashion, ironically subverts the well-known imagery of Christina Rossetti's 1872 lyric In the Bleak Midwinter by starkly reporting, "Police are hunting high and low for the thief who nicked the winter snow." It's certainly a brave choice of base text by the composition organisers. Out go the three magi, the shepherds, the angels, the stable, the oxen and asses, Mary, Jesus and Joseph, Herod, and all the familiar cast. In fact, the sole reference to the traditional nativity narrative exists in the one-line refrain, which implicitly suggests Polaris is the nativity star, the one sign in the heavens that can still be seen from motorways the length and breadth of the country by anyone taking the time out of their busy lives to look up and reorient themselves. But the star of the north is the star of truth. Personally, I'm interested to see what some of our emerging new folk singers might generate from such a prompt. But in tonight's show, I'm pleased to say we will explore the role of musical education and training in professional and academic contexts with international German soprano Sophia Livertov. Sophia, who is based in Leeds and Strasbourg, has performed at a number of international music venues, including Tonhalle Zurich, Wigmore Hall, Tivoli Vredenburg, and the recent concert stage in Jakarta. She has featured in the Oxford Lieder Festival, the University of Leeds International Concert Series Summer Festival, and the Orchestra of Change's Climate Concert Series in Germany. Sophia has taken operatic roles in productions of La Bohème, Don Giovanni, and the Magic Flute, among others, and most recently appeared in the role of Owl in Opera North's production of The Cunning Little Vixen. During the COVID pandemic, Sophia recorded her first album, Sounds of Indonesia, with tenor Satira Krishna. When she isn't busy performing herself, Sophia teaches piano, singing, and music theory to private students, ranging from coaching on classical vocal techniques to practice for the associated board examinations in English, German, and Russian, a teaching career that spans 13 years. And I'm delighted to say that Sophia joins us on the line now. Good evening to you, Sophia. Thank you for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio today.
Good evening, Christopher. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, I hope my overview has given our listeners a strong sense of your dedication to professional music. But is there anything you would like to add by way of introduction?
No, I think it's been all correct. I'm currently still in contract at Opera North, being part of the current season, and continue to perform in the UK and abroad.
A busy time.
Yes, very busy currently, yes.
So let's begin then, Sophia, by exploring your route into music. When did your music education begin, and how did it develop in the German education system?
Well, when I was 5, and that is thanks to my parents, to whom it was very important. So I started learning the piano at an early age, and also had music theory lessons besides that. And as a teenager, I joined the girls' choir in Hanover called Mädchenchor Hannover. And that's how I started my singing career, which was back then still more of a hobby. My piano playing was at that time much more serious than it is now.
And when did you start the piano work?
Well, I started at the age of 5, and I always had a great interest in learning the piano. And during my teenager years, it became more serious. I joined competitions and also the Lower Saxony Youth Symphony Orchestra, where I played the piano and the celestes in their various projects. And after finishing the gymnasium, I studied piano at the Hanover Conservatory before switching to opera singing.
And what brought the move into opera singing?
Well, singing for me was always more of a hobby where I could, let's say, relax or not being so competitive. And when I started studying the piano, I noticed that it's not really what I imagined to be. I couldn't imagine to doing it all my life. And I always enjoyed more making music with other people. And as a pianist, you spend a lot of time practicing alone. So at the same time, I also had singing lessons and tried to do entrance exams at different conservatories. And at some point, I got into the conservatory in Lucerne in Switzerland, which made me move abroad.
And in your experience, is there a perfect time for a child to start opera singing?
Well, as a child, I wouldn't start opera singing. As a child, I would start singing in a children's choir or a youth choir, as I did. And opera singing is something you would develop slightly later, because as a youngster or as a young adult, the voice is still developing. So I would say at around 18 years, it's a good time to start trying out the operatic repertoire, or maybe at 16 years, but not much earlier.
So how then does a young aspiring opera singer move into familiarizing themselves with that kind of musical repertoire?
Well, besides opera, there's a huge classical repertoire which you can study. I mean, art songs and different oratorio and choral music, and of course you can learn arias from operas, which, depending on your technical abilities, suit the voice. So there's a lot of things one can try out before starting the conservatory.
And in the German school system generally, Sophia, is there a particular emphasis on high quality music teaching alongside children's academic studies? Is that something that's a big part of the experience?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, every school or every gymnasium is different, and in every state in Germany, the education varies. But I was doing a lot of extracurricular work, taking private music lessons, and of course during the choir and the symphony orchestra. But the gymnasium I was at, which had a focus on ancient languages, there were always a lot of opportunities for performing. So they were organizing school concerts where you could perform even with an orchestra sometimes. And they would definitely encourage that. I also had the possibility of graduating the gymnasium with a music major, where my practical skills as a pianist could be taken into account in the grading. So my teachers were very kind when I was missing out on school due to concerts or other things connected to music.
And how is the music curriculum examined in Germany at the moment?
What do you mean exactly?
So if you're moving through a gymnasium in Germany, how is music tested in examination situations?
Do you mean something like ABRSM?
I'm thinking more of the leaving certificate that you would finish school with.
Well, I mean, if music is one of your major, I don't know what, I think I had Latin and Catholic religion and biology with it, but music, I mean, we obviously had to write tests, and as I said, some elements of my performing career, I was attending competitions, which in Germany is called Jugendmusiziert, is competition for youth making music. So I had some success there, and that was also being considered during the exams. But well, let's say in Germany, you can visit a music school or you can take private music lessons, but there's, let's say, not such thing like ABRSM or Trinity. We don't have that. If you're good enough, you try and enter a music conservatory. And then, of course, there is the specific grading system which takes place at conservatories.
Fantastic. So let's think about conservatories now then, Sophia. What kind of preparation goes into a student making that application to push their musical interest that much further in the conservatory system?
That depends very much on the instrument. For example, as a pianist, you start usually very young, so you have already years of practicing and performing, and lots of lessons. You prepare a specific program for the entrance exams. I mean, it's very similar to what is happening in the UK or other countries. And then you have also theory exams, and if you're good enough and if there are enough places, then you get a place.
And how much of this entrance exam is focused on the theory as much as the performance? Is it a kind of 50-50 split?
If I'm honest, I don't remember that, but the theory exam is important. So yeah, you have to get through the music theory exam. I think for all instruments, also for singers. So yeah, that's a lot of people do need to study for that.
And how many instruments are you required to be proficient in for that kind of entrance exam?
If it's for piano or string instrument, I think it's just the main instruments. As a singer, you also need to play piano a bit, but that exam usually it's not very difficult.
And once you're in, Sophia, you get this extensive and quite intensive training in musical performance, working with leading practitioners internationally. Are you able to say a little bit about your experience of going through that process for our listeners?
Well, when you start studying, you have a lot of practical lessons. Obviously, one-to-one lessons are very important in order to help you progress and develop your technique. Then you have, again, music theory lessons. As a pianist, you have ensemble lessons, then music history. I also had some psychology lessons in combination with teaching. As a singer, you have drama lessons and opera scenes, and also language lessons, language coaching, and it changes from year to year. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot going on, which makes it very interesting to study.
Yeah, I'm particularly intrigued in the psychology lessons. Are you able to say a little bit more about that?
Well, the psychology lessons, what I was talking about, because I studied piano and piano education, so that was more about the teaching psychology. That was very much connected to teaching.
And what kind of element did that bring to your experience of teaching?
Well, I think it's important because, I mean, later in Lucerne, after doing my bachelor in singing and also opera school, I also did a master in vocal pedagogy, where again the psychology aspects of students comes again. So it's rarely that you end your study years and dive in immediately into a performing career. Mostly it becomes some kind of a portfolio career where you perform and teach. And if you want to be a good teacher, then of course the psychological aspect is of importance, because you're working with young people or older students, and every student is different. So you need to have the ability to adapt.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in this idea of the independent route through music training that the conservatoire system seems to offer. What kind of approaches were your friends taking while you were was it Lucerne you said?
Yeah.
What kind of directions did their development take?
You mean the colleagues are my colleagues I was studying with?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
What kind of different directions did they go in? Were they all going into classical music as well?
Well, some of them, for example, they started teaching a lot. Some of them are now teaching at conservatories or at music schools, where they not only teach classical music but also pop. Some of my colleagues, they're actually only performing or have international careers. So it's very, very, very different from person to person. It also depends what you like. Do you like traveling, or do you like staying more in one city or one country? It's very, very individual.
Brilliant. And when you come out of the conservatoire system, what further study and training is needed afterwards if you're particularly keen to go into a career in classical music?
Well, let's stay with singing because that's my career now. After finishing the studies, you start, or even before you start working on building your network. For example, I was performing concerts, but at the same time, I still continue studying with a private teacher because as a singer, the work never ends. Your voice keeps developing depending on what repertoire you have to sing, and you never know how your voice actually sounds. So you need someone who tells you if you're doing the right thing or if maybe you have to adjust. So you continue working on a private level, and just hope for the best.
And when it comes to applying for various roles in particular concerts or particular productions, how do you go about making decisions about which are worth applying for and which aren't?
Well, let's say what was before the pandemic, because before the pandemic there were more opportunities also in the UK. And first of all, it's the financial aspect, because going to auditions, or even if you have to travel to other countries, it's always a lot of money. So you have to decide which auditions or opportunities are worth approaching. And then you have to know if it's something that one can sing well, or if it's something that fits the voice. And if it's both the case, then you go and try. And what has changed after pandemic, that of course there are less opportunities. Now we know with the cuts for the funding for arts organizations, including opera houses and orchestras, there are basically less jobs. So at the moment, if I get a new audition, then I'm going for it.
Brilliant. And in terms of managing the shift between opera, which is of course has that element of drama and potentially dance and significant movement on stage, and the classical concert hall performance, how do you manage that transition?
I would say, it happens by itself. An opera production never happens in a day or a weekend. It's usually a process of several weeks of musical rehearsal and then stage rehearsal. So you really have the time to dive into the drama and the acting besides the actual singing. And concert performance is a little bit different. There are fewer rehearsals, so you come already prepared and then make music with the musicians that you're performing with. So it's slightly different. Also, during concerts, I sometimes or often I can use my score, while on the opera stage, everything, of course, is off score.
Yeah, what goes into learning all of those parts when you're on stage in an opera? How much preparation goes into making sure you've got the lines learned?
Oh, a lot of preparation. Now at Opera North, if you're in the chorus, then you work every day, have musical rehearsals for 6 hours, and then again, a lot of rehearsal time on stage until everything is really on autopilot.
That's incredible. I don't quite know how you managed to fit all this stuff in, Sophia.
Excuse me?
I don't quite understand how you managed to squeeze all this stuff in to 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, I think you get used to it. This season was very busy. We have or still have 3 opera productions going on tour next week to Newcastle, Nottingham, and Manchester. And this week we had 5 performances of 3 different operas. So the brain is really working.
Sounds like
but you also get used to it. Yes, definitely.
Well, we've got some questions coming in from listeners, Sophia,
Oh,
which
great.
I might put to you if that's okay. We might save some for later because we're going to be touching on some of these topics a little bit later on. So
Hmm.
thank you to Paul Foz for his question that he's just sent about uh, what particular things he might do for children who have a talent for singing. We're going to look at that in the last section of the show. I've got a question, or it's more of a statement actually, from Nick, who says, I started learning at 5 as well. It clearly went wrong, but I love playing the cello and piano. Do it if you love it. Is there a chance that a child might pick up the wrong instrument? And if they do, how do they correct that?
Uh, well, of course. I mean, I think it's best if a child notices that it's not the instrument they would love. Instead of stopping, it would be great if the parents would encourage the child to try out other instruments. So it's always nice if you see children in the concert hall where they can see how an orchestra is playing or what singers are doing, and it's basically to try out new things. But why learning an instrument is so great, especially for children, because they learn to be disciplined in a positive way. Because of course, even if you're very talented, you can't progress without practicing. So maybe if you don't have enough fun with an instrument, it means that one has to practice a little bit more to enjoy playing the music you like or to play more songs. So an instrument can teach a lot, not only just the music, but also listening to each other, communication with other musicians, and reaching specific goals.
That's a really good response, I think. A sense that if the volition is there from the child to engage with the instrument, whatever it might be, then that practice is going to become easier. Practice is always one of the more challenging things to engage with in music, I suspect. I can remember being a young chorister myself and having to go through quite lengthy performances just to produce a passable piece of music for our local parish congregation. So I can only imagine what it's like in some of these international opera houses. Well, thank you, Sophia, for that detailed insight into the work that goes into developing a musical talent. Much of this work, of course, goes on unseen in the background as part of a learning journey that is as unique as the musician, and one that seems to grow as much out of chance meetings with other musicians as out of
Yes.
disciplined practice that anyone who's ever tried to learn an instrument might be familiar with. The professional musician's life is already a busy one, but somehow, as we've said already, you've also managed to fit in some private teaching, Sophia, which I'd like to explore in the second part of the show, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
And listeners, if you've got any questions you'd like to send us in your message, then we will follow those up in the rest of the show. And we'll be right back after this.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
A record number of students from disadvantaged backgrounds have applied for the most selective UK university degrees, says a report on the BBC News website. The report is based on data released by the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service, known as UCAS. The students have applied to Oxford and Cambridge and for degrees in medicine, dentistry and veterinary science. UCAS Interim Chief Executive Sander Crystal described the applications, which have an October deadline, as encouraging. The Sutton Trust charity, however, said that the advantage gap had hardly shifted. The data is based on a participation of local areas measure, which splits students into 5 groups based on how many people aged 18 and 19 in their area go on to higher education. Those from areas where the fewest numbers of young people go to university are classed as the most disadvantaged. Applications for this group are up by 7% since last year, in contrast to the most advantaged areas, which is up by only 2%. However, the total number of applicants from the most advantaged areas is over 17,000, compared to a little over 3,000 from the most disadvantaged areas. Other key findings from October applications include a 6% increase in the number of UK applicants receiving free school meals, although the overall numbers of those receiving free meals is on the rise. A drop of 7% a year in 18-year-olds applying to medicine degrees, and a slight drop in total numbers of international applicants. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan was in the news again this week as she told English schools that parents have a right to view the sex education materials which are being taught in schools. The announcement comes as the government is due to launch a public consultation into relationships, sex and health education. Guidance has been in place since the subject became compulsory in primary and secondary schools in September 2020. But Ms Keegan said she wanted to debunk the myth that parents cannot see what their children are being taught. Jeff Barton of Askell said he agreed with transparency on RSHE materials and that this is key, but that sending the letter when some schools were on half-term was slightly odd. The BBC also reports that Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, has been accused of misleading the public about the risks of social media and of contributing to a mental health crisis amongst youth. The claims were made in a federal lawsuit in the United States, but many in other countries will be following with interest. The lawsuit accuses the company of ensnaring users whilst concealing the substantial dangers of its platforms. It also said that the company had collected data on children under the age of 13 and that this breached the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Meta is contesting the lawsuit and will likely present research it says shows that teens say social media actually helps them when they are struggling. It's not the first time social media companies have faced lawsuits, but it is the first time so many attorneys general, 33 in total, have signed such a suit, in addition to those already filed by families, young people and school districts. Those working with children and young people in the UK will undoubtedly be interested in the progress of the lawsuit. Dyslexia Scotland has announced on its website that former Strictly Come Dancing winner and Dyslexia Scotland ambassador Hamza Yassin will talk to an audience as part of Dyslexia Awareness Week Scotland. Yassin, who is dyslexic, became an ambassador for the charity earlier this year. He says he is passionate about sharing his story during events held in the first week in November. In a week where The Guardian reports that more than 1 million UK children experienced destitution last year, meaning their families could not adequately feed, clothe, clean or keep them warm, the BBC covered a story of a primary school in Peckham where most children are homeless. The school has nearly 300 pupils, all of whom receive free uniform, trips and meals. The school conducted a survey in which most families describe themselves as living in non-secure tenancies. This can mean sofa surfing with friends, living in B&B accommodation or living in hostels. Parents of children at the school spoke positively about the support they received from the school, but also focused on the toll the uncertainty took on them and their children. Meanwhile, The Guardian tells of concerns expressed by poverty campaigners, teachers and welfare workers about the damaging effects of destitution, including physical ill health, mental illness, school absence and poor behaviour. Both articles can be found online and give more details on the latest findings. Finally, Schools Week reports that as many as 1 in 10 school workers had to wait over 60 days for DBS checks last year. A Freedom of Information request showed that 2.5% of those submitted took more than 60 days to complete, more than triple the rate in 2021 to 22. Jeff Barton of Askell says it all adds to the pressure that school leaders and teachers face in recruitment and reflects the widespread underinvestment in public services. A spokesperson for the DBS said neither Ofsted nor the D of E have raised any concerns about delays. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back to our show on music and teaching with classical soprano and private music teacher Sophia Livertov. In the opening section of the show, we learnt about Sophia's exciting journey through the European conservatory system as a student and the challenges that come with establishing a career as a touring musician. But how does private music teaching fit into this pattern, Sophia? And when did you first start teaching students?
I began teaching students at a very, quite early. I think I was 20 maybe, first as an assistant or helping them with music theory. And when I moved to Lucerne for my vocal studies, I got a job as a piano teacher at a boarding school in the Swiss Alps. It's called École d'Humanité, where I was teaching young adults and teens piano and also chamber music.
And were you living at the school at the same time?
No, I was living in Lucerne, but I was traveling once a week there, which made my studies possible.
And how did you find teaching in the boarding school environment? It's perhaps closer to the conservatory environment in some senses.
Well, not quite maybe that school, but it was it was very exciting because the children were very different, coming from different countries and with different backgrounds. And because of, obviously, the parents weren't there who would maybe at home push them to practice more. So the kids were, on their own. Either they would practice or they would not practice. That was my job, to encourage them to do more, which sometimes was quite challenging, but often very, very rewarding.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that international mix, though. It's a really quite potent combination of languages and cultures and ways of thinking about music. In my own boarding school, we have students from 6 continents across the world. We have students from Australia, Africa, everywhere you could think of. And what it brings to the choir is a real kind of international flavour that perhaps sets that kind of environment apart from the traditional English state secondary school.
Yeah. Well, at that school, I don't know how it is now because it's already a couple of years ago, but the children, they didn't have access to a computer only if they had to study, or they didn't have mobile phones which they could play with all the time. So basically in their free time, they had to entertain themselves either by, I don't know, games or playing music together or, So that was a special environment. I don't know if it's the same now.
And was there much of a culture of the children forming their own music groups where you were?
Yes, indeed. I remember I had a music group where they were combining Mozart with percussion instruments and creating some compositions by themselves. And there were also, I think, they were putting some theater shows on and concerts. And it was important for them to to get the experience of performing, but also to share what they have learned with their community. That's why I think it's very important for schools or music schools to give that possibility to perform, because that's why we are doing it. It's not just for us to learn some music, but it's to share with others, no matter how small that circle is.
I'm just thinking, in my own school, we have a similar kind of student-led movement when it comes to music. In the past, we've had some of the boys form their own barbershop quartets to entertain their classmates at various things like Christmas dinners and other things. We've had girls form their own kind of version of a barbershop quartet. I don't quite know what we would call the female version of that. And then we also have our standard mix of sixth form aspirant rock stars with their own little bands they've set up. And the practice rooms are always thundering with the sound of music.
Oh, that's
of
great.
one sort or another. Was that the same where you were?
Yeah, sounds familiar. Yeah.
And after this experience in boarding school music, Sophia, you went into private tuition afterwards, is that right?
Yes, because after Lucerne, I did another postgraduate master in Amsterdam, which was focusing entirely on performing. So at that stage, I was having private students and also mainly adult students, because I just didn't have the time to give all my attention to children. I like teaching teenagers, but it's also very, you need to have the time and the focus to really do it. With adult learners, it's a little bit different.
So let's have a think about the teaching process then in one-to-one scenarios. What can a student gain from one-to-one music tuition, do you think, that they can't gain from a school-based examined music curriculum, for example?
Well, one-to-one, I think it's if the relationship with the teacher, between the teacher and the student matches, then it can be really one of the best experiences a music student can have. And because in a one-to-one lesson, the teacher can really give their undivided attention to the student and help them to work on technique and solve problems or give solutions specifically to the student's needs. It's not possible in a bigger group because the time is just not there.
And what aspects of your experience as a former music student shape your practice now as a private music teacher?
Well, as a student, I was fortunate to study with absolutely wonderful teachers who gave me so much. And I'm very thankful for that. I also had, let's say, less inspiring pedagogical approaches. And what I definitely learned is that being a teacher is a huge responsibility, which can't be taken lightly, especially if it is teaching children, because I can open the child's eyes towards classical music and inspire them to learn and go to concerts. But on the other hand, a teacher can also really destroy the child's urge to do any music. So that's why, the responsibility is huge. And as a teacher myself, I always try to find an individual approach to a student, be it adult or teenager, and discover with them what they want to achieve, what their goals are, and maybe explore with them what they can reach. Sometimes you never know what you're capable of unless you try it out.
And do you feel any sense of responsibility, since you mentioned that word, to pass on any particular approach or method in your practice?
Well, of course, every teacher has a method, but it doesn't mean that it can't change. It depends, again, very much on the student's needs, because everyone learns differently. Some students can read music easily, some need more help with that. Others, I don't know, have different areas which they would like to develop. So I don't like to stick to a specific method. I rather be flexible, and well, it's also more interesting for me if I try to find a personal approach to every student.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I sometimes read the biographies of various classical composers, and sometimes you get a sense that there's always something of the teacher that the student takes away with them and
Yeah.
brings it into their own voice or into their own work. I wondered if you had a sense of any particular influences that you are aware that you're either introducing students to or introducing into your teaching of those students.
You mean influences from my own teachers?
That's right, yeah.
Yes, for sure. Maybe something I'm also unaware of. I mean, for example, as a piano teacher, I do teach more beginners, but I remember as a beginner myself, I was never taught to improvise or play without a score. So this is, for example, what I was learning myself when I had time during the pandemic to implement more into my own teaching, because I think it is important.
So one would imagine then that some of your students would be able to walk into these various railway stations we find across Europe and produce a tune on the pianos they find on the platform.
Well, hopefully, yes.
And what kind of work goes into that we don't see when we have the virtuoso performance?
Sorry, could you phrase this question again, please?
Yeah, what's sitting behind all of that improvisation that we sometimes see in public spaces?
You mean the work they have done before?
Yeah, how do you get better at improvising if you're used to working with a score?
Well, of course, you have to have an understanding of the harmony, and freeing yourself from a score is not easy. But learning to improvise gives you another sense of playing. Or, for example, singing. I mean, improvisation in singing was also important, especially in Baroque singing, where singers were improvising just as the performance was going on. This is something I think we have slightly lost, because everything needs to be perfect. But it's a lot of practicing, also a lot of work, just maybe slightly different than you would do with a score.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions coming in from our listeners I might put to you if that's okay. So one question from Paul Foss is, do you come across singers operating at your level who went to UK state schools? And he says, I know Russell Watson and Leslie Garrett did, but doubt whether there's any opportunity for talents from deprived areas. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I must say, I don't know who of my colleagues went to state school, if I'm honest. But that's true. Well, for example, I know that Opera North has a very exciting education department. and where they have an outreach program for deprived areas and workshops for schools and youth choir and youth orchestra. So I think there are even in the UK opportunities for people. One just has to look for them. But of course, they're not. There should be more.
It's often the people, of course, that need to look for them most that aren't quite sure where to look in the first place, isn't it? There's that public education mission that's needed as well, really, isn't there? Did you catch that last question, Sophia? I think we've lost Sophia briefly. We'll just try and see if we can get her back. Sophia, you with us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. I was just saying there's a bit of a public education mission that's needed, certainly in the UK.
Christopher, sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
I was just saying that perhaps there's something of a musical education mission in terms of the general public being a bit more aware of what opportunities might be available to students from more deprived backgrounds. Certainly, one would hope the school would be the first point of contact for those types of students.
Yes, I mean it should be the school in best case should provide the information to parents where children could get a maybe free music education or less expensive. And but I mean in generally what's currently happening now in the country with all the funding cuts to not only to opera houses but other arts organizations and even summer schools now. So I think there should be a general mission for music and drama to be taken seriously, but especially by the government as well. That's unfortunately also the problem.
Yeah, I think we might return to that theme in the last section of the show. I was just wondering about adult learners, Sophia. What prompts adults to take up private music tuition, and how do you guide them?
There are, yeah, it's again very different because obviously people people come from different backgrounds. But I have students who started learning the piano, for example, already in their 40s and 50s, and for them it's just a way to recharge after a hard day of work and take the minds of everything else to refocus. uh, a student even said it's like yoga for the brain and the fingers. For
That's a good way of describing it.
for others, it's, for example, if they would like to reconnect with their grandchildren who are also learning an instrument. And sometimes I had a student whose parents never supported them, and he always wanted to learn the piano, but it wasn't possible. And now he finally could do it. And I'm a big believer that it's never too late to learn an instrument or to start singing at any age, because there are always so many benefits for the health and the well-being that yeah, will just make the life better.
And for those adult students and indeed younger students that you coach and teach, if they're looking to push their musical education beyond the hobby or beyond something to do after school, how do you start to prepare them for the challenges that come with long rehearsals and competitive auditions?
Mm, I have to think about that. Um, well, students, let's say let's take an example of a singing student. Uh, of course, if someone decides to entry that profession or to start auditioning, they already bring a lot. Either they're very talented or they studied already a lot as a child. So there must be, yeah, a big wish to do this career. And already entering a conservatory can be, well, yeah, can be quite stressful because you have to do entrance exams, you have to prepare for theory lessons. So that requires a lot of discipline and yeah, good preparation and good nerves.
And is there anything else they might need in addition to the discipline, good nerves, a determination to want to do the career? Is there any other element that's important in them making that transition?
Well, I think we talked about that. Of course, support from the family would be great. I've been very lucky to have parents who always supported me and encouraged me to do what I wanted to do. Um, or I mean, at least friends. Of course, as a teacher, a teacher should be also very supportive. But I think it's also important to be honest with the young people that this is a difficult profession, and of course, there is always a way if you want something and are really passionate about it. But it's definitely not an easy way, and there is no guarantee that when you finish your studies that you'll be able to make a living. Usually, that takes years and years of building a portfolio career and understanding what one's strengths are, and also a big amount of luck.
Certainly, it sounds like luck comes into it. But if we think about the last few years, particularly the pandemic, I mean, the whole of the world seemed to get landed with the same bad luck at the same time. What role did the pandemic play in reshaping your teaching and reshaping your performance?
The pandemic definitely made me more resilient, and I would say, well, I make me acknowledge that it's really the path that I wanted to take. Because of course everyone was hit, but especially the world of musicians and singers was hit even more because we couldn't perform, we couldn't sing. For example, all my contracts were cancelled and I couldn't go on stage for over a year, which is of course horrible for every artist, but also very difficult because of the loss of income. So yeah, it was difficult. But on the other hand, it made me think about my career, what I wanted to say as a musician, and I decided to learn more about the aspect of self management. I joined a course from the Be Your Own Manager community in Vienna, led by Bernhard Keres. Well, I learned more about self promotion and marketing, and I organized an online music festival with colleagues. And together with my partner, Satria Krishna, we recorded an album with Indonesian art songs. So, yeah, I think I can keep myself busy.
Sounds like it. And in terms of your teaching, did you move into online teaching in one-to-one scenarios? And if you did, how did that feel?
Uh, yes, I moved into entirely into the online teaching mode. Well, I was on teaching online before with some of my students who are based in other countries, so it was not entirely new. But I was surprised how well it was working. I even taught 5-year-old children, which, with the help of parents, progressed quite well. And I still continue to teach online, well, not as much as before, obviously, due to my performance career, but it was interesting. I learned a lot. I'm a fan of technology, so I do believe that online teaching can be effective as well.
That's really interesting to hear. I wonder, with the singers particularly, how that works in terms of the singer's posture and the way they project their voice when you're working in this online environment. Do you have to make any particular adaptations to the way you think about the guidance you're giving them if you're essentially advising them through a screen?
Yes, with singers, it depends very much on their level. In general, with beginners, it might be a bit more difficult, but with students who are a little bit more advanced, uh, you need to find a way to explain something maybe differently because you can't show them, or maybe I can't show them how my breathing is exactly. But that forces, that forced me to be more precise and find, clearer ways to express myself. And now with microphones, well, today my mic gave up, but with microphones, the sound quality can be quite good.
I'm just thinking how accompaniment works, though, for students who are singing to perhaps a piano accompaniment. What kind of arrangements did you need to make sure that that still happened?
Well, for piano accompaniment, I pre-recorded what they were singing. Now I didn't try it now, but there are new apps which make it possible to sing or play at the same time without any delay. So yeah, there are a lot of possibilities. Of course, I must say, in life, of course, it is better. I mean, we we don't have to discuss that, but it doesn't mean that online teaching doesn't have its benefits as well.
Well,
And
it's really pleasing.
it's better than, for example, if someone is ill or can't come, it's still better to have an online lesson than miss an entire, I don't know, 2 weeks of lessons.
Yeah, keeping that momentum going is important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's really pleasing, Sophia, to hear a professional performer talking so enthusiastically about the work of music teaching and supporting those with a desire to develop their musical knowledge, technique, and interest, whatever their age and background. I'm sure your students will hear the benefits of your teaching as they make fewer mistakes in their piano playing or are able to sing that lengthy semi-quaver run they've been working on for months in the single breath that is written. But what effect has your teaching practice had upon your ongoing development as a musician yourself?
Mm, well, I think every time, for example, in summer, I visited Indonesia for the second time with tenor Satya Krishna and our pianist. We gave concerts by it and also master classes. And every time I do that, I realize that it actually makes my singing also better. Because with beginners, you have to go back to the basics, or if I have to teach the same repertoire I'm singing, it, yeah, it makes me think more about the technical aspect, or maybe helping someone with a specific problem, which in the end benefits myself. So I like teaching. I think there should be a good balance between if you're teaching and performing. For example, at the moment, I don't have many students because I just don't have enough time for that. But maybe next year that will change and I will have again more time and capacity to focus on students.
Well, that's very eloquently put, Sophia. Thank you. In the final section of the show, I'd like us to reflect a little on the place of music education in Britain, Germany, and wider Europe, and on how we bring more children and young people into our professional music venues. And we'll be right back after this.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Well, welcome back to the final part of our exploration of music study, teaching and performance with Sofia Livertov. We've talked about the special nature of one-to-one music tuition, Sophia, and I wondered whether we could think a little bit about whether society places enough value on music education in Britain, Germany, and wider Europe. I mean, what cultural differences have you experienced in attitudes to the value of professional classical music culture in the course of your performance career?
I think that, of course, it should be valued more. As in general, art should be valued more. But if I would compare UK and Germany or other parts of Europe, then definitely in UK it's sadly less. As I already mentioned, especially what is happening now with all the funding cuts, which is, I mean, devastating for the institutions, but also for all professional musicians who are basically losing their livelihoods. And also, if there won't be enough professional jobs, what's the point educating young people to become professional musicians? So that's in the first place. And yeah, it's a difficult question how to change that. But I mean, from my perspective as a musician, in general, during the pandemic, there were so many online concerts, and the musicians tried to provide comfort and support for everyone else. So maybe now it's the time where we need the support from our audiences and music lovers to yeah, try to put some pressure on the government and in general to raise the voice that music education and general arts education, theater education is it's important. It's a way how we can express yourself and how to form creativity which will benefit other areas. Even if someone studies music and doesn't become a professional musician, the education will benefit for their future life. But I don't know how to answer that question, sadly.
Have you seen any particularly successful schemes in Europe that we might replicate over here?
um Well, in the first place, for example, in Germany, the education is basically free. I mean, on conservatory level, it depends very much on the state. But let's say, I think in Hanover, it's about 400 euros per semester. In Berlin, it's even less. So, I mean, people can afford this. And then you can get, if you're talented enough, get another uh, grant or support from the government. It's not like in the UK that the education is so expensive. And I mean, there are programs which are already happening. I mean, I already mentioned the education of Opera North because I have been in contact with it. There are other smaller companies and institutions who provide it. They just need more support. I know in Germany and in Switzerland, professional musicians are going into schools and playing concerts. I've been part of concerts for children, and it's always so exciting to see how easy it is to engage children in classical music. It's not difficult at all. They just need that exposure.
And we've spoken already about your own musical journey starting at around about the age of 5. How good do you think we are in the UK at welcoming 5-year-olds into our professional music venues?
Hmm. I think there could be more. I know for sure there are in London some concerts for toddlers, I think. Um, and there, I know in the north also performances for children, but I'm sure that there can be much more. For example, yeah, Opera North does performances for children, also at schools, also specific children opera, which is great. Uh, but I would say the more the better. Also for children to see actual other children perform on stage. That is, I think, even more inspiring.
Yeah, I can remember taking she's now 8-year-old daughter down to London to see the ENO Relaxed performance of Philip
Yeah.
Glass's Akhenaten, which is a fantastic opera. And it's one of those pieces that really, really stays with you. And it was really, really nice to be able to take her into the opera house, or the theatre, I suppose it is technically, um, for this very, very long performance. We'd already seen it acted out on the television from the Met performance that was done during lockdown. So we kind of knew what we were in for. But the experience of being in there, seeing all the costumes and the lights, and we had the lead singer actually do a little talk and presentation both before and after the performance to really give the children a sense of they're not just passive observers of the traffic that takes place on stage, but encouraging them to join in with various parts of the chorus. It was really, really quite inspiring to see.
Yeah, that must have been great, and I mean, then the children are definitely interested in this kind of music if it is made, if it's presented in an interesting way.
And what kind of performances are in the offing in north of England then for children under 11, say, to experience this wonder of being in the opera house or the theatre space and engaging with these characters, some of whom may be dressed up as owls?
Well, that's what we had in March, our the production of The Cunning Little Vixen. We had also school performances in Leeds and in the other cities. Opera North is going on tour too. And yeah, the reaction from children was always so much more different than from adults. They it was yeah, very very fun to watch.
Did you get to go into the schools as well?
No, the schools were coming into the theater. But I
And
think there were also a show called Little Vixen for smaller children, and I think next year there will be uh, another production coming. I just don't have all the information at the moment.
and did you get the chance to talk to any of the children who were at the performance?
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, the children I talked to really, really loved it. Also, especially seeing children dance and perform different animals on stage. So that was exciting.
Yeah, if I'm thinking about the children on the stage with you, what have you appreciated in working with young people in your recent performances?
Excuse me, could you repeat the question again?
Yes, I suppose I'm asking what it's like working with child performers as a professional singer.
Yeah. Um, well, every time I'm doing it, I'm so impressed how great the children are. They're so disciplined and so professional, and yeah, it's very very impressive what they can achieve. Besides Vixen, there was also a performance of Eugene Onegin, um, with the youth orchestra and also singers, young singers, and they did an incredible job. Or also in the last Tosca production, I mean, it's great. It's children are capable to show and to achieve so much. So I think a lot of times they're being underestimated, if I may say so.
And
And they
how are
take it
the
also very, very serious what they are doing. Sometimes I was feeling more like a child than them.
Sorry, I was just going to ask how the rehearsals are designed to make them child friendly for such big productions.
Well, that's yeah, that's taken care of there by for example, by the education team. And I mean, I don't know the specifics of it, but of course they are not working as much as professional opera singers are. They have restrictions, and there's always someone taking care of them. So an education team, yeah,
So they've got a kind of wider support network to help them
yes,
deal
yeah,
with everything that goes on around that. And
yeah,
how do
yeah.
they manage to fit their studies in? Presumably there's time set aside for them to keep up with their schoolwork.
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for that, but I'm. I mean, after school, I think Opera North has also a program after school, and I'm happy to connect you. So I'm sure the person in the education team will be able to answer that.
And if we go further afield into some of your performances outside Europe, what kind of experience have you had with younger children or young people in the music spaces that you visited?
um,
Are you often
let,
performing for younger audiences when you move outside the UK?
I wouldn't say often, but I do performances. For example, last year I did a climate concert, and one of the climate concerts was specifically designed for children. It was about species who went extinct or going to go extinct, and I was singing the part of the wolf, and other instruments were playing different parts, different animals. So that was very engaging for children. And recently, I've done master classes in Indonesia with a youth choir. And again, I mean, it was amazing, just amazing to work with them, because they were so into the music, so serious. In 3 hours, they changed so much. And yeah, well, it's fascinating how quickly children can adapt and learn.
And how does the music culture work in Indonesia? It's a country I don't know a lot about.
Well, in Indonesia, there's no state funding for music education. It's all mainly private funded, but it's a huge choir community, and they operate on a very high level. They do, for example, international competitions, and yeah, choir singing is very, very popular.
And is that a community based thing or is that something that's developed by schools?
It's more community, or also coming from university. For example, my partner, who is a professional singer, he first studied architecture, and at the university they had a choir formed of students for different departments, and yeah, that's how he became a singer, basically through a choir. Also churches, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, when you were talking about your experience in the first boarding school you worked in, I presume that wasn't a religious school. Would I be correct in making that assumption?
Yes, yeah.
So I wonder what you think the role of religion is when it comes to also taking responsibility for developing classical musicians, given that so much of the classical music repertoire has a kind of religious base.
Oh, that's that's a difficult question. Um, well, I honestly I don't have an answer for that, but I think if a community, be it a religious community or a church or um, any other community, be it at school, can encourage music making um, on any level, then they that should be done.
Yeah, I'm certainly thinking about some of our new students who we've brought to the school specifically because they've got a particular talent for liturgical singing, and it's an increasingly rare skill in England to have children who are particularly equipped to work with religious music, especially since in the Yorkshire area, of course, we've recently had the Minster School close, based at York Minster, and
Yeah,
that's had quite a significant effect, I think, on admissions to other church schools around the country.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very sad because it. I mean, what is so great about music making and I mean singing or playing an instrument, that music is a universal language. It doesn't matter where someone is from or the belief or anything. It's just when you make music, it's just about making music and being in the moment. So yeah.
Well, I think that just about brings us to the end of the show, Sophia. So I'd just like to say I've greatly enjoyed our conversation and exploring your thoughts on the complementary nature of your performance and teaching work. It's been an absolutely fascinating education for me personally, and our listeners have certainly appreciated your answers to some of the questions they've posed. In English schools, it seems it's now all too common to see music squeezed out of the academic curriculum to make yet more time for writing and counting, and to see music training as one of those luxury features of school life that gets shunted into ever diminishing lunchtime and after school extracurricular slots. Good school music provision so often depends on the hard work and dogged determination of one inspired and inspiring teacher who can hold the baton, bring out the best of their charges in limited evening rehearsals, and manage the reams of paperwork that come with rights clearance, risk assessments, and curating the performance space. And yet, how often are music departments expected to put on an immaculate musical program when a whole school set piece event is required: an assembly procession, a carol service, a summer concert, a recruitment open day? Then, of course, a school's musicians represent the whole learning community and the sense of harmony that every good school would aspire to have. I've always been convinced that the school that sings well together will have a lot of other things going right elsewhere. It's been a total pleasure to have you with us tonight, Sophia.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you
And
for
perhaps
inviting me.
perhaps we could have you and your partner on a later show, perhaps next year.
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you.
I wish you every success with your performance, rehearsal, and teaching work as we stand on the brink of an Advent and Christmas season that will see you performing in Mendelssohn's Elijah in Halifax next week. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Coming Sunday. Yes.
And in Silent Night in Germany in December.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sophia. It's been great to
Thank you
have
very
you
much,
on.
Christopher. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
So thanks again to Sophia Livertov for being such a knowledgeable and thoughtful guest this evening. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in tonight and sent their messages in. Do check out our other Teachers Talk radio shows this week. We have a number of new hosts continuing to make their debuts this month. So take a look at the schedule on the website and give them a listen if you can. I'm sure they'd appreciate your support and in-show text messages. Catherine Taylor's show on Teachers as Reflective Learners continues some of tonight's threads as she speaks to Professor Rachel Lofthouse about CPD on Tuesday's Late Late Show at 9 p.m, while Tom Rogers and James Radburn discuss data analytics and its educational role on tomorrow's Late Show at 6 o'clock. Just two shows that I think are worth a live listen. As always, you can catch up on anything you've missed with our excellent and ever-growing panel of teacher presenters at www.ttradio.org. And if you'd like to learn a bit more about some of the pressures on secondary music teaching, then Amanda Kinsley-Smith's show on music makers as dream makers should be on your playlist. Or if you'd like to know why children like spooky stories, then Darren Lester explores this question in his latest show on spine-tingling fiction. Both shows can be found from the website by searching by topic or host name at the top of the Listen Back page. And if you have something you want to say or ask others about education anywhere on planet Earth, then perhaps you should consider applying to join the station as a show host. We are always on the lookout for those with current or recent experience of the classroom and other less familiar educational settings. Full details can be found on our website www.ttradio.org, or if hosting seems a bit too much at the moment, then consider applying to appear as a guest on a show via the contact page. I'll personally be looking for guests for my 2024 shows between now and Christmas. That's all from me for this month, so thank you for listening. I wish you a happy and musical late autumn half-term, and we will speak again in November. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.